Episode 4. October 15th, 2007. Monday, 7:54 p.m. Los Angeles, USA. Simultaneous with the time the Nurses International morning meeting is breaking up. Neil McColgan put down his pen to rub his eyes. The schedule he'd been working on was still unfinished. The software company whose program was supposed to do the schedule had recently changed hands, and without the original CEOs keeping everything in control, the software was getting things mixed up. Ergo, the need for Neil to painstakingly redo it by hand. He looked at his watch. It was already close to 8, and he was supposed to have been off at 7, and he was exhausted. The fact that he had not managed to get the schedule completed was based on two things. The first was a major pileup on the 405 freeway, causing several deaths and a number of very serious injuries, all of whom had begun to arrive in their respective ambulances less than half an hour after Jennifer Hernandez had childishly stalked out of his office. All that took a number of hours to handle, meaning separating the dead from the living, stabilizing the most seriously injured, and sending them up to the OR, and finally dealing appropriately with the less severely hurt by setting and casting broken bones and suturing lacerations. The second reason the rework schedule wasn't done was because he wasn't concentrating well. "Damn!" he shouted at the wall and then felt guilty and foolish. Spinning around in his chair, he looked out in the tri-age area. Two patients were looking at his direction with raised eyebrows. Embarrassed at his outburst, Neil got up from his chair and, after giving the two startled patients a reassuring wave, closed the door and sat back down. Neil couldn't concentrate because of Jennifer, although he had inevitably used what he called her puerile behavior as further justification for his decision not to go to India. He slowly began to admit that he'd handled the situation miserably. First off, the real reasons were simply more selfishly motivated. He eventually admitted that the excuse he had given her, namely the reworking of the ER schedule, had been a transparent lie. He should have been more upfront so that there could have been, at the minimum, an honest discussion. And finally, the part that made him feel most guilty was that the excuse he gave himself, that he would have been more receptive if the death involved her mother, not her grandmother, was also a lie. He was well aware that Jennifer's grandmother, for all the intents and purposes, had been her mother. At one point, Neil called Jennifer's cell phone, but she didn't answer. He had no idea if it was because she noticed it and was he who was calling, or if she had already departed and there was no way to find out. He even thought, in a moment of irrationality, about running out to Los Angeles airport to catch her before she did leave, but he dismissed the idea because he had no idea which airline she was taking. For having made travel arrangements to India 5 months ago, he knew there were several multiple carriers flying from LA to New Delhi. All afternoon, Neil progressively chastised himself for having handled Jennifer so badly, to the point he began to accuse himself of exhibiting the immature, selfish behavior he had blamed on her. He had even gotten to the point of believing she had acted entirely appropriately by walking out and not looking back. By then, she had a good reason to suspect that had she had done otherwise, he probably would have dug in his heels and made an even bigger fool of himself. Impulsively, Neil stood up, sending his desk chair rolling backwards on his casters to collide with the door. Taking a fresh white coat from the hook behind the door, he pulled it on and went out to the central desk. He asked the first nurse he could corner if she knew whether Clarence Hodges had left. He was officially off duty the same time as Neil, but like Neil, he rarely left on time. Happily, Neil was told he was in one of the bays sewing up a laceration. For Neil's benefit, the nurse pointed out to the appropriate curtained area. "Wow," Neil exclaimed when he looked over Clarence's shoulder. Clarence was in the process of sewing a right ear back onto the side of a patient's head. He was doing a meticulous plastic repair with what looked like hundreds of tiny sutures of gossamer, like black silk thread. Neil had recruited Clarence. He had been a classmate of Neil's in high school. For college, they had chosen rival schools, with Neil going to UCLA and Clarence to USC. But for medical school, both had chosen UCLA. What made them special friends was their shared love for surfing. "That's quite a laceration." Clarence leaned back and stretched. "Bobby here and the skateboard had a little argument with the tree, and I think the tree won." Clarence picked up the edge of the drape and looked in at his patient. He was surprised to find him asleep. "My goodness, I guess I've been at this for a while." "Why didn't you have one of the plastic surgery boys come down and handle it?" Neil asked. "Because of Bobby," Clarence said, as he got another stitch in the claws of his needle holder. When I suggested that, he said that he was going to leave, despite his ear hanging off by a few threads of a tissue. He said he'd been here for so long he wasn't going to wait. He wanted me to do it even though I told him I wasn't a plastic surgeon. He was persistent and even stood up from the table as if he was heading for the door. So to make a long story short, that's why I'm doing it. Do you mind if I ask your opinion about something while you work?" "Not at all. With Bobby sleeping, I could use the company, of course. 2 seconds ago, I didn't know he was sleeping." Neil rapidly told Jennifer's story, which Clarence listened to without comment while he continued to reattach Bobby's ear. "So, that's it in a nutshell," Neil said when he had finished. "What do you want my opinion about? Whether I'd go to India to have a hip replacement? The answer is no." "That's not the same. The issue is how I handled Jennifer's request. I think I did a lousy job. What's your take?" Clarence looked up in his friend's eyes. "Are you serious? How else should you have handled it?" "I could have been more honest." "In what regard?" "I mean, I can't imagine you want to go all the way over to India for someone's grandmother, do you? I mean, it's not like you could bring her back to life or anything." "It's true, I'm not wild about going all the way to India at the moment," Neil admitted. "Well, there you go. You handled it just fine. It's her problem the way she responded. She shouldn't have walked away." "You think so?" Neil asked. He was unconvinced. After explaining the episode to Clarence, he actually felt guiltier about his behavior, not less guilty. "Wait a minute," Clarence said, holding up the suturing and staring back up at Neil. "I'm beginning to think there's something you're not telling me here. What's your relationship with the woman? Are you sweet on her or what? You guys dating?" Sort of," Neil admitted. "Actually, I'm not sure. It's like she's been holding me at arm's length. We've been getting together a lot and it's wonderful. We never run out of things to talk about, and she's been really open with me, telling me things she's never told anyone else. I know that for a fact." "Have you guys ever hooked up?" "No, but it's not for not trying. I mean, we tried once, but it was awkward. It's kind of strange. We can be talking about the most intimate things, and as soon as I try to move in on her, wham, this wall comes up. That doesn't sound good." "I know, but on the other hand, she's really smart, and she works and studies her butt off, and she's terrific to be with. I've never been with a girl quite like her. If she's who I think she is, she's also a piece of ass. I can't deny that. She caught my eye the first time I saw her as a first-year med student." "Okay," Clarence said. "This changes everything. What I am hearing is you love this woman. Let's just say I'm interested, but since she's got some baggage, there's more that I've got to learn. You're thinking about chasing after her to India? Is that what I'm hearing you want my opinion on?" "It is. The one thing I do know about her with absolute certainty is she's headstrong. She makes up her mind about things instantaneously, then holds on to her decision like a dog with a bone. At the moment, she is royally pissed at me, and I can understand why. She took me into her confidence, and now that she has asked me to support her, I, in a sense, confirmed her worst fear by not doing so. If I don't go over there, I have to kiss goodbye any chance of learning anything more about her. Then do it. That's my advice. Handling the arrangements of grandmother's body will probably take all of a half hour, and it's over. Then you guys can make up. That way you won't be burning bridges over this affair. So you think I should go? Absolutely. And you told me you found India fun, so you can kill two birds with one stone. I told you it was interesting. Interesting or fun, what's the difference? As far as your responsibilities here are concerned, don't worry about it. I do have the next 4 days off. See what I mean? It was meant to happen. Go. As far as your obligations here are concerned, after your 4 days, don't worry about it. I owe you. I'll cover for you, and when I can't, I'll see that someone else does. I certainly need more than 4 days. The travel alone takes 4 days. Don't worry about it, okay? I said I'd cover. Do you know where she's staying? I do. That's all you need. When will you leave? Tomorrow, I guess, Neil said, wondering if he'd allowed his friend to talk him into something that might end up being more complicated and more stressful than he had anticipated. If he only knew. October 16th, 2007. Tuesday, 7:45 p.m. New Delhi, India. By reflex, Sameera Patel smiled coyly at the two Sikh doormen at the Queen Victoria Hospital's front entrance. She was dressed in the nurse's uniform just as Veena had been the night before. They did not return her flirtatiousness. There was no doubt they recognized her. Each silently reached out and pulled open his respective door and with a bow allowed her to enter. Durrell had coached her for several hours that afternoon before Sameera had set out on a mission, which had included what to do once she was inside the hospital. Despite her excitement, she followed the suggestions to the letter. She marched across the lobby, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Instead of the elevator, she took the stairs up to the second floor, where the library was located. After turning on the lights, she got down from the shelves, several orthopedic books, and spread them out on one of the tables, even opening one of the section on knee replacement, which was the procedure her patient, Herbert Benfatti, had that morning. All this was Durrell's idea. He wanted her to have a clear, confirmable explanation for being in the hospital after hours if one or more senior nurses questioned it. Once the library was prepared to her liking, and she had downloaded Benfatti's chart from library's workstation into a USB storage device, she returned to the stairwell and climbed up to the 5th floor, where the OR suite was located. By now her excitement was built to the point of true anxiety, even more than she had expected, and it caused her to question why she had been so eager to volunteer. At the same time, she knew exactly why she had volunteered, although Veena Chandra had been her best friend since they had met each other in the 3rd grade. Sameera had always felt inferior. The problem was that Sameera envied Veena's beauty, which Sameera knew she would not compete against. Ergo, her wish to compete in every other way. Sameera was convinced Veena's hair was darker and shinier than hers, and Veena's skin more golden, her nose smaller and shapelier. Yet despite this competitiveness, about which Veena was totally unaware, the girls had developed a keen friendship based on a shared dream of someday emigrating to America. Like their other friends at school, both had early access to the internet, which Sameera had availed herself of much more than Veena, which had provided both girls an oculus to the West, an introduction to the idea of personal freedom. By the time they had reached their teenage years, they'd become inseparable and shared their secrets, which for Veena included abuse by her father, something she had never shared with anyone else for fear of bringing shame to her family. Sameera's secret, sharply contrasting with Veena's, was that she was fascinated by pornographic websites and consequently sex, finding it hard to think of anything else by its denial. She was dying to experience sex herself and felt like a caged animal, especially because of the strict Muslim upbringing. Ultimately, what cemented the relationship between the two young women was their willingness to cover for each other. Each would tell her parents she was sleeping at the other's homes, enabling them to go to Western-style clubs and stay out all night. Instead of embracing the traditional Indian karmic values of passivity, obedience, and acceptance of life's difficulties based on expectations of reward in the next life, both Sameera and Veena progressively wanted their rewards in this life, not the next. Yesterday, when Sameera heard that Veena had been selected as the first of the nurses to carry out the new strategy, she'd been immediately jealous. That was why she had acted as she had, volunteering for the next task, with the claim she'd do it better and without hesitation. The reason she felt so confident was that there was one arena in which she had made more progress than her friend, and that was in the degree of which she had abandoned the old culture of India and embraced the new culture of the West. Her affair with Durrell was clear evidence. With a trembling hand, Sameera pushed open the stable door on the 5th floor. It was relatively dark. For a few seconds, Sameera merely listened. She heard no sounds except the constant, omnipresent, low hum of the HVAC machinery. She stepped out into the hallway and allowed the door to close behind her. Confident she was alone, Sameera walked in the direction of the operating suite while trying to keep the sound of her heels striking the composite floor to a minimum. The lighting was dim, but adequate. Passing through the outer double doors, she made certain the surgical lounge was empty. She knew that it was occasionally used during the evening and that the night shift staff used it to take breaks and catch some TV, even though officially it was off limits. She moved on to the double doors of the OR suite itself and cracked them. Unfortunately, the hinges complained with a screeching noise, making Sameera cringe. She could feel the heart throbbing in her chest and could hear it in her ears. After pausing for a few seconds to check for any kind of response to the sound of the doors, Sameera stepped into the operating suite. With the same screech occurred as the door closed, she cringed again. But the earlier tomb-like silence immediately descended like a heavy blanket. Sameera was eager to get this portion of the task over with. She could now feel perspiration on her face, despite the ORs being over-air-conditioned. She was not fond of feeling anxious, and because of the long-term, duplicitous life she'd led as a teenager with her parents, she'd felt it all too often. Once in the OR, and confident she was alone, Sameera made quick work of getting the syringe full of succinylcholine. The only potential problem was that, in her haste, she nearly dropped the glass bottle containing the paralyzing drug. If it had broken, hitting against the hard floor, it would have been a calamity, since she would have hesitated cleaning it up. Each sliver of glass would have been equivalent of a cuirassier poison dart in the jungles of Peru. It wasn't lost on her how ironic it would be if she'd end up found dead in the OR in the morning. It was with great relief that Sameera retraced her steps back to the stable. With this portion of assignment out of the way, she thought she was home free. But little did she know. Descending 2 floors, she checked the time. It was a tad past 8. Her only concern at that point was Mrs. Benfatti, whom she had met that afternoon. Would she still be visiting? On the positive side, it was the night of Herbert Benfatti's surgery, and the chances were he was still feeling the results of the anesthesia, meaning he'd probably be seriously sleepy or sleeping. The only way to find out was to check. Opening the third-floor stairway door, Sameera glanced up and down the corridor. 2 nurses could be seen in the brightly lit nurses' station, which meant the other 2 were either off in patient rooms or taking a break. There was no way Sameera could know. With her anxieties again mounting, she told herself it was now or never. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out into the hall and headed towards Mr. Benfatti's room. All went well until she arrived at the man's door, which was open about 6 inches. Eager at that point to get the whole thing over with, Sameera raised her hand to knock when she found her hand poised in midair. To her utter shock, the door had been pulled away the instant Sameera had expected to make contact with its surface. Reflexively, Sameera let out a yelp of surprise, and she was unexpectedly confronted by one of the evening nurses, whom Sameera knew only by her first name. It was the remarkably obese and brusque Charu, and she completely filled the doorway. In contrast to Sameera's reaction of surprise, Charu acted irritated that someone was in her way. She looked Sameera up and down as if evaluating her and said, in not too friendly a manner, "What are you doing here? You work days." Charu and Sameera knew each other only from nurses' report during the shift change when the day nurses communicated to the evening nurses each patient's status and specific needs. "I just wanted to check on my patient," Sameera said, her voice more hesitant than she would have preferred. "I've been in the library studying up on knee replacement surgery." "Really?" Charu questioned with a tone that suggested doubt. "Really?" Sameera echoed, trying to sound forceful. Charu eyed Sameera with a look of disbelief but didn't voice it. Instead, she added, "Mrs. Benfatti is waiting." "Will she be leaving soon? I wanted to ask Mr. Benfatti a few questions about symptoms." Charu merely shrugged before pushing past Sameera. Sameera watched her as she headed in the direction of the desk. Sameera was in a quandary about what to do. She couldn't hang around the floor waiting for Mrs. Benfatti to leave, yet if she returned to the library, she wouldn't know if the wife departed. On top of that, she wondered if running into Charu meant she would abort the effort altogether. Of course, the trouble with doing that was that it might be a week before she had another American patient with some kind of history of heart trouble who would make an appropriate target. By then, the benefits of competing with Veena probably wouldn't accrue. Sameera was still debating the issue when she was surprised yet again. This time it was Mrs. Lucinda Benfatti, who was a moderately tall, heavy-set woman in her mid-50s and tightly permed hair. Having met Sameera that day, she recognized her immediately. "My word, you do put in a long day." "Sometimes," Sameera stammered. A mission during which she was to avoid being seen was devolving into a bad joke. "What time do you work until?" "It varies," Sameera lied. "But I'll be heading home shortly. How's the patient doing? I just wanted to stop by and check." "Well, aren't you a dear? He's doing reasonably well, but he's not good with pain, and he's having a lot of pain. The nurse who is just in here gave him an additional pain shot. I hope it works. Why don't you go in and say hello? I'm sure he'd be glad to see you." "I'm not sure if that's appropriate, since he had just a pain shot. I don't want to bother him." "It'll be no bother, come on." Mrs. Benfatti took Sameera by the elbow and walked her into the husband's room. The lights had been dimmed, but the overall level of illumination was reasonably bright, since the large, flat-screen TV was on and tuned to the BBC. Mr. Benfatti was propped up in a semi-recumbent position. His left leg was encased in a device that was slowly but constantly flexing the knee joint 30 degrees several times a minute. "Herbert, dear," Mrs. Benfatti called out over the sound of the TV. "Look who's here." Mr. Benfatti lowered the TV's volume with the remote and looked over at Sameera. He recognized her and, like his wife, commented on the impressive length of Sameera's workday. Before Sameera could comment, Mrs. Benfatti intervened. "I don't know about the rest of you people, but I'm exhausted. Going back to the hotel and collapse. Good night again, dear," she said, kissing Herbert's broad forehead. "Hope you sleep well." Mr. Benfatti's right hand waved weakly. His left hand, with the IV going into his arm, remained perfectly still. Mrs. Benfatti said goodbye to Sameera and departed. Sameera found herself in an awkward predicament. She wasn't interested in getting into a conversation with the man if she was going to go through with the plan. Yet, she couldn't just stand there. Plus, having run into Mrs. Benfatti, was there more reason to cancel? The only thing that was for certain was what she thought was going to be so simple was turning out to be anything but. Unable to make up her mind, Sameera just dumbly remained rooted to her spot. Mr. Benfatti waited for the moment before inquiring, "Is there something I can do for you, like run down to the kitchen and rustle you up a snack?" He chucked briefly at his own attempt at humor. "How's your knee feeling?" Sameera questioned while she tried to organize her thoughts. "Oh, great," Mr. Benfatti scoffed. "I'm ready to go for a jog." Unconsciously, Sameera's hand slipped into her pocket and her fingers encountered the full syringe. With a start, she was reminded why she was there. While Mr. Benfatti carried out about the details of the pain he'd been suffering, Sameera struggled with what to do. Recognizing there was no rational way to make a decision short of the crystal ball she didn't have, she opted for the more simple choice of acknowledging her impetuosity and just proceeding as planned. The deciding factor was the realization that Mr. Benfatti would not be discovered for hours maybe, since his wife had just left and the nurse had given him a shot. What that meant was that Sameera would have lots of time to be far away from the scene when he was discovered. She pulled the syringe from its hiding place. Using her teeth to remove the needle cap, she reached for the IV port below the millipore filter. Mr. Benfatti had seen Sameera suddenly approach the bed, had caught sight of the syringe, and had stopped his diatribe about pain. "What's this?" he questioned, when Sameera ignored him and raised the needle up to the IV port to inject. He reached out with his right hand and grasped Sameera's right wrist. In the next instant, their eyes locked. "What am I getting?" "It's something for your pain," Sameera nervously improvised. The fact that Mr. Benfatti was holding her terrorized her. For a second, she irrationally worried that what she was about to give Mr. Benfatti would pass into her from the contact. "I just got a pain shot 2 seconds ago. Isn't this overdoing it?" The doctor ordered another. "This is more to get you to sleep longer." "Really?" "Really," Sameera repeated, reminding her of the unpleasant conversation she had just had with Charu. She looked down at Mr. Benfatti, tightly gripping her wrist. The man was strong, and although she wasn't yet experiencing pain, it was close. He was restricting her blood flow. "Is the doctor here?" "No, he's gone for the day. He called us in." Mr. Benfatti maintained his grip for several more seconds, then suddenly released it. Sameera let out a silent sigh of relief. The very tips of her fingers had begun to tingle. Without wasting another moment, she struggled to get the needle inside the port, being especially careful in her haste not to prick herself. With succinylcholine, even a small amount could create problems. Without delay, Sameera emptied the syringe. A second later, a cry began to issue from Mr. Benfatti's lips, causing Sameera to clamp a free hand over the man's mouth. Mr. Benfatti responded by reaching for the nurse's call button clasped to the edge of his pillow, but Sameera was able to yank it out of reach with the hand holding the syringe. Almost immediately, she felt the resistance she had had against her hand cupped over the man's mouth melt away. Taking her hand away, Sameera noticed a kind of wriggling under the man's skin, as if suddenly his face has been infiltrated by worms. At the same time, his arms and even his free leg began to briefly and uncontrollably jerk. The next second, the twitching stopped. In its place was a darkening of the skin that was particularly apparent due to the white light of the TV. It had started slowly, then picked up speed, until all of Mr. Benfatti's exposed skin was an ominous dark purple. Although Sameera had purposely avoided looking into the man's eyes while he had gone through his rapid death throes, she did now. The lids were only half open and the pupils blank. Backing up towards the door, Sameera collided with the chair and grabbed it to keep it from falling over. The last thing she wanted was someone to appear, questioning a crashing noise. Taking one last look at Benfatti from the doorway, Sameera was momentarily hypnotized by the fact that the man's leg was still rhythmically being mechanically flexed and extended, as if he was still alive. Turning around, Sameera fled from the room, but then forced herself to slow to a walk by sheer will to keep from attracting attention. Maintaining her eye on the nurse's station, where she could see all the 4 nurses, Sameera made her way to the stairwell. Only when she was inside did she allow herself to breathe. Surprised that she'd been holding her breath, she'd been totally unaware. After picking up the books and turning out the light in the library, Sameera descended to the lobby floor. She appreciated that the lobby was empty and appreciated even more that the doorman had gone off duty. Out on the street, Sameera caught an auto rickshaw, and as they pulled away, she glanced back at the Victoria Hospital. It looked dark, shadowy, and most important, quiet. During the ride home, Sameera felt progressively better at what she had accomplished, and the fear, anxiety, and indecision she had experienced rapidly faded into the background. As the auto rickshaw reached the bungalow's driveway, it seemed to her that such problems were mere blips on the radar screen. "I have to leave you here," the driver said in Hindi as he pulled to a halt. "I don't want to get out here. Take me to the door." The driver's eyes nervously flashed in the darkness as he looked back at Sameera. He was clearly afraid. But the owner of such a house will be angry, and he might call the police, and the police will demand money. "I live here," Sameera snapped. "If you don't take me, you won't be paid." "I choose not to be paid. The police will demand 10 times as much." With a few more appropriate words, Sameera climbed from the 3-wheeled scooter and without looking back, started hiking down the drive. In the background, she heard a burst of equivalent profanity before the auto rickshaw noisily powered off into the night. As she walked, Sameera mulled over how she was going to describe her experience taking care of the American. It didn't take her but a moment to decide to leave out the minor concerns and concentrate on the success. Mr. Benfatti had been taken care of. That was the important thing. She surely wasn't going to complain like Veena had. Entering the house, she found everyone, all 4 officers and all 11 other nurses in the formal living room, watching an old DVD called Animal House. The moment she walked into the room, Cal paused the movie. Everyone looked at her expectantly. "Well?" Cal questioned. Sameera was enjoying teasing the group. She had taken an apple and sat down as if to watch the movie without providing a report. "Well, what?" Sameera questioned, extending the ploy. "Don't make us beg," Durrell threatened. "Oh, you must mean what happened to Mr. Benfatti." "Sameera," Durrell playfully warned. "Everything went fine, exactly as you all suggested it would. But then again, I didn't expect anything different." "You weren't scared?" Raj asked. "Veena said she was scared." Raj was the only male nurse. Despite his bodybuilder appearance, his voice was soft, almost feminine. "Not in the slightest," Sameera said, although while she spoke, she remembered how she'd felt when Benfatti was gripping her arm, hard enough to hinder the blood flow. "Raj has volunteered for tomorrow night," Cal explained. "He's got a perfect patient scheduled for surgery in the morning." Sameera turned to him. He was a handsome man. In the evenings he wore his tie shirts, a size too small to emphasize his impressive physique. "Don't worry, you'll do fine," Sameera assured him. "The succinylcholine works literally in seconds." "Veena said her patient's face twitched all over the place," Raj commented with a concerned expression. "She said it was horrid." "There were some fasciculations, but they were over practically before they began." "Veena said the patient turned purple." "That did happen, but you shouldn't be standing around admiring your handiwork." Some of the nurses laughed. Cal, Petra, and Santana stayed serious. "What about Benfatti's computerized medical record?" Santana asked. Since Sameera hadn't yet mentioned it, Santana was afraid she'd forgotten. She needed the history to make the story more personal for TV. By leaning back against the couch and straightening her body out, Sameera was able to reach into her pocket and pull out the USB storage device, similar to the one Veena had provided Cal with the evening before. She then flipped it in Santana's direction. Santana snatched the storage device out of the air like a hockey goalie, hefted it as if she could tell whether or not it contained the data, then stood up. "I want the story filed with CNN. I've already given them a teaser about it, and they were waiting anxiously. My contact assures me it's going right out on the air." While the people who had been sitting next to her on the couch raised their legs, Santana worked her way from behind the coffee table and started for her office. "I do have one suggestion," Sameera offered after Santana departed. "I think we should get her own succinylcholine. Sneaking into the OR is the weakest link in the plan. It's the only place in the hospital where we don't belong, or if any of us were to be discovered, there would be no way for us to explain." "How easy would it be for us to get the drug?" Durrell asked. "With money, it's easy to get any drug in India," Sameera said. "Sounds like a no-brainer to me," Petra said to Cal. Cal nodded in agreement and over to Durrell. "See what you can do." "No problem," Durrell said. Cal couldn't have been more pleased. The new strategy was working, and everyone was on board, even offering suggestions. He couldn't help thinking that starting the scheme with Veena had been brilliant, despite the suicide scare. Just a few days before, he'd been afraid to talk with Raymond Hausman, but now Cal couldn't wait. Nurses International was beginning to pay off, which he couldn't have been more pleased about, even if it wasn't in the way he had expected. But who cared? Cal thought. It was the results that counted, not the method. "Hey, who wants to see more of the movie?" Cal called out, waving the remote above his head. October 16, 2007, Tuesday, 11:02 p.m. New Delhi, India. The wheels of the wide-body jet hit hard as they touched down on the tarmac of the Indira Gandhi International Airport and jolted Jennifer awake. She'd been awakened 20 minutes earlier by one of the cabin attendants to raise the back of her seat as the plane had started its initial descent, but she'd fallen back asleep. The cruel irony was that during most of the final leg, She'd not been able to sleep until the last hour. Pressing her nose against the window, Jennifer tried to appreciate her first images of India. She could see little more than the runway lights passing by as the powerful engines reversed. What surprised her was what looked like a fog obscuring the view toward the terminal. All she could see were hazy, individually illuminated airplane tails rising up out of the general gloom. The terminal itself was a mere smudge of light. Raising her eyes, she saw a nearly full moon in the apex of a dark grey sky with no stars. Jennifer started arranging her things. Lucky for her, the neighboring seat had been vacant, and she had taken full advantage with the surgery book, the India guidebook, and the novel she brought for the flight, or more accurately, the 3 flights. Her itinerary required 2 stops, which she actually appreciated as an opportunity to stretch her legs and walk, but only 1 change of aircraft. By the time the big plane had nosed into the gate and the seatbelt sign had gone off, Jennifer had her carry-on items packed away in her roll-on, but then had to wait while others closer to the exit slowly filed out. Everyone looked as she felt, exhausted, yet having landed in a strange and exotic country, she could feel herself enjoying a second, or maybe a third or fourth, wind. Despite the fact that she was coming to deal with her beloved grandmother's death, she couldn't help but feel a certain excitement as well as nervousness. The flights themselves, although remarkably long, had been endurable. And contrary to her initial worry about their duration might give her too much free time to obsess about the loss of her closest friend, it seemed to have been the opposite. To some degree, the forced solitary time had allowed her to come to terms with the loss of tapping into one of the lessons she had learned from studying medicine, that death was very much a part of life, and its existence was one of the things that makes life so special. Jennifer wasn't going to miss her grandmother any less, but her loss wasn't going to paralyze her. Once off the plane, Jennifer walked through the mildly dilapidated and dingy terminal building, finally appreciating that she was truly in India. On the plane, everyone had been in Western clothes. Now she started to see bright-colored saris and equally bright-colored outfits on women she would later learn were called salwar kameezes. On men, she saw long tunics called dhotis over either voluminous lungis or pajamas, which were loose pants snugged at the ankles. With some concern that she might face a problem, Jennifer approached her first potential hurdle: passport control. She couldn't help but notice that the lines were long and moving slowly for the few booths occupied by the border agents, both for citizens and for tourists. On the other hand, the line in front of a diplomatic booth was completely free. Its occupants were either chatting or reading newspapers, with little confidence in bureaucracy in general, and in India's in particular. Thanks to what she had recently read in the guidebook, Jennifer fully expected to have a problem because she was not carrying a visa, even though the airline had been so apprised. It all depended on Mrs. Kashmira Varini and whether she'd made the call she'd promised and whether she had spoken to the right people. "Excuse me," Jennifer had to call out at the booth's window to get attention. Conversation stopped and the newspapers were lowered. The rather large group manning the diplomatic line, in sharp contrast to the other booths, which were occupied by single agents, all stared blankly at Jennifer as if shocked that they had business. All the agents were wearing saggy brown uniforms, and although the clothes were not obviously soiled, everybody appeared mildly disheveled. As directed, Jennifer handed over her passport and began to explain the situation, when the border agent slid back the passport and, without speaking, motioned to Jennifer to use one of the other lines. "I was specifically told to come to the diplomatic window," Jennifer explained. Her heart sank as she began to worry about possibly not getting into the country after such a long trip. Hurriedly, She related that she'd been instructed that a visa would be waiting for her specifically at the diplomatic window. Still without speaking a word to Jennifer, the border agent picked up his phone. Even from where she was standing outside the booth, she could hear some shouting on the other end of the phone line. A minute later, she watched as the agent opened the drawer beneath the countertop he was sitting at and extracted some papers. He then motioned to Jennifer to hand back the passport, which Jennifer was happy to do. The agent then glued into it what she assumed was a visa, initialed it, and then stamped it. Only then did he slide it back to Jennifer while motioning her to pass. With relief at allowed to enter the country after fearing for the worst and surprised at not having to pay for the visa, Jennifer grabbed her roll-on and quickly moved in case they changed their minds. It was curious, the episode that happened, without agents speaking one word to her, which reminded why she disliked bureaucracy. Next was baggage, which surprisingly turned out to be more efficient than it was at JFK. By the time Jennifer had located the correct carousel, her wheeled bag was there, having already made several circuits. The customs agents appeared even more rumpled than the passport people, and even less engaged. They all were sitting on the edges of the long countertops they had built to facilitate opening and examining luggage, but no one was doing either. Dutifully, Jennifer slowed, but they merely waved her on. Jennifer then pushed through the customs security doors and entered the terminal's main arrival area. Immediately she had a presage of one of India's main characteristics, an impressive population. The place was mobbed. Although the arrivals part of the terminal had been crowded, thanks to multiple international flights landing almost simultaneously, it was nothing like the rest of the terminal. Just beyond the doors was 30-foot wide upward sloping ramp, more than 80 feet in length and lined with metal handrail. Pressed against the handrail and pancaked against one another like sardines were hordes of expectant people. About half the crowd was in Western dress, including a large number outfitted in fancy uniforms with visored hats, sporting hotel insignias. Jennifer stopped in her tracks, taken aback by this new quandary. Having been told she would be met by an Amal Palace Hotel employee holding up her name, she had not concerned herself with this aspect of the journey. Clearly, that had not been a wise move. From her vantage point, there could have been thousands of signs and even more people. Never happy to be the center of attention, Jennifer nonetheless tried to make herself apparent as she gradually made her way up the incline. As she vainly looked for her name, she invariably briefly locked eyes with strangers, each of whom appeared to be more foreign and exotic than the next. As a young single woman with essentially no travel experience, it was intimidating, even a little scary, especially with no police or other authorities in sight. Just stay cool, Jennifer silently advised herself, hoping at any second to hear her name being called out over the din. Unfortunately or fortunately, Jennifer was not sure whether anyone had accosted by the time she reached the top of the ramp. Unwilling to press into the mob, she turned around and as slowly as she had risen up the incline, she now descended. No one had called out her name. No one had called out to her by the time she reached the exit doors, or if they had, she hadn't heard it. With the idea of returning inside to see if there was any kind of information available for hotels, and out came a youthful man in a porter's uniform that was a step down in appearance from those worn by the custom men. He looked more like a student than a professional porter, and the uniform was not only tattered but also much too big. He was pushing a four-wheeled cart loaded with luggage. As he came through the doors, he had built up speed to get up the incline. As a consequence, he almost ran into Jennifer. "I beg your pardon," the porter exclaimed, catching sight of Jennifer and with some difficulty pulling his cart up the ramp. Jennifer stepped aside. "It's my fault. I shouldn't be trying to enter and exit. Can you tell me if there is an information booth around?" Someone from my hotel was supposed to be meeting me, but I don't know where. What hotel? The Amal Palace. The porter whistled. If someone was supposed to pick you up from Amal, they will be here, no doubt whatsoever. But where? Go up to the top of the ramp and turn right. There'll be a number of them for sure in that general area. They'll all be in dark blue uniforms. Jennifer thanked the man and headed back up the ramp. Although she did feel mildly reluctant to push into the crowd, she did so, and as the porter promised, she immediately found the Amal greeters in their highly pressed sartorial splendor. Although Jennifer thought it odd, they didn't make themselves more apparent. She now confronted the man with her name on his chalkboard. He introduced himself as Nitin and took her 2 pieces of luggage. He also called Rajiv, who was supposed to be her driver, on his cell phone before ushering Jennifer out of the terminal. As they walked, they kept a friendly banter. When Jennifer and Nitin got outside and was standing on the curb, waiting for Rajiv to bring the car around, Jennifer again noted the heavy fog-like haze that blanketed the area and hung heavy halos around the airport street lamps and the headlights of cars. It was exactly as she had seen from the plane, but now with the addition of an acrid smell. "Is this haze typical?" she asked Nitin, while she wrinkled her nose. "Oh yes," Nitin said, "at least this time of the year." "What time of the year is it not around?" "During monsoon." "Is that it?" "That's it." "What causes it?" "Dust and pollution, I'm afraid. We are 11.5 million people in Delhi now, more or less officially, with more people moving into Delhi every day than are born here. Unofficially, I think it's more like 14 million. It's like a mass migration from the countryside, which is straining everything and causing increased traffic. The smog is from exhaust and dust from the streets mostly, but the factories here in the outskirts add to it too." Jennifer was horrified but did not comment. She thought LA was bad in September, but Delhi made LA seem like springtime in an alpine pasture. "Here comes Rajiv," Nitin said as an ultra-shiny, black Ford Explorer with darkly tinted windows pulled up to the curb. Rajiv leaped from the driver's seat, came around the vehicle, and greeted Jennifer in the typical Hindu fashion of pressing his palms together, bowing over them and saying Namaste. He was attired in a splendidly spotlessly clean, freshly pressed, white uniform, complete with white gloves and a white visored cap. While he opened the rear door for Jennifer, Nitin loaded her 2 bags in the back. A moment later, she and Rajiv were on their way into New Delhi. Passing the first car, heading in the opposite direction, took Jennifer by complete surprise. Although the Explorer's steering wheel was on the right, the implication hadn't dawned on her. When the headlights of the approaching car appeared out of the gloom and headed for them, she assumed they would pass on the right, but as the vehicles sped closer together, the oncoming car did not move to Jennifer's right. On the contrary, it appeared to be drifting to the left. The moment the 2 cars passed, Jennifer had to suppress a scream, expecting they were about to collide head-on. It was only then that she figured it out. In India, like in Great Britain, autos kept to the left and passed on the right. With her heart thumping in her chest, Jennifer sat back. She was ashamed of her travel naivety. To calm down, she used the cold towel Rajiv had given her to mop her brow and took a sip from the iced bottle of water he had provided. Meanwhile, she stared out of the window in amazement about what she was seeing. Once they had reached the main highway from the airport access road, their progress slowed to a crawl. Despite being after midnight, the road was choked in both directions with all manner of vehicles, but mostly trucks, every one of them overloaded in the extreme. Overall hung a choking layer of both exhaust fumes and dust, plus the din of unmuffled engines. and each vehicle's horn sounding every few seconds for no reason other than the mere whim of the driver. As Jennifer looked out on the scene, she found herself shaking her head in disbelief. It was like a wild dream, and if this was the way traffic was at midnight, she couldn't even conceive of what it was going to be like during the day. The driver spoke reasonable English and was more than willing to play tour guide as they worked their way into the city. Jennifer peppered him with questions, particularly when he turned off the main road and entered the residential section of Chanakyapuri. Here at least there were no trucks or buses, and traffic moved more freely. Jennifer noted block after block of relatively similar, huge white mansions, which appeared to be mildly dilapidated but still impressive. She asked about them. "They are British Rajara bungalows," the driver said. "They were for the British diplomats and are still used by some diplomats." Soon the driver was pointing out the various foreign embassies, for which he seemed proud. He pointed out an American embassy, which looked rather ugly to Jennifer when compared with those of many of the other countries. Its main characteristic was that it was large. Jennifer turned as it passed on by her left to get a better view. She imagined she'd probably have to make a visit to help dealing with her grandmother's remains. Next, the driver pointed out the Indian government buildings, which were stunningly impressive. He said they had been designed by a famous English architect, whom Jennifer had never heard of. A few minutes later, they reached the hotel and pulled up its ramp to the front entrance. At first, she was disappointed. The structure was merely a modern high-rise that could have been anywhere in the world. She'd expected something more typically Indian. But inside, it was another story. To her surprise, the hotel's public places were buzzing with activity, despite the hour, and Jennifer had to wait in line to check in. Actually, it wasn't a line per se, but a comfortable chair where she was offered refreshments and given a chance to gaze around the lobby area. Instantly, Jennifer could see why the porter at the airport had responded as he had when she had named where she was to stay. Jennifer had not stayed in many hotels in her life, and certainly never in one like the Amal Palace. It was, in her own words, sumptuous, even decadent. 20 minutes later, the formally dressed guest manager, who had shown her to her room on the 9th floor, backed out and closed the door behind him. En route to the room, he had described the hotel facilities and services, which included a fully staffed 24-hour spa exercise facility with an outdoor Olympic-sized pool. Jennifer decided that she was going to make an effort to enjoy her stay at least a little, as Neil had suggested. Briefly thinking about Neil raised her hackles, so she put him out of her mind. After fastening the safety lock on the door, Jennifer opened her bags, unpacked, and took a long, hot shower. Once out of the shower, she puzzled over what to do. Although she knew she must be exhausted, the excitement of the arrival and the knowledge that it was midday in LA had given her yet another wind. She knew that if she tried to sleep, she'd toss and turn and become frustrated. Instead, she donned one of the luxurious Turkish robes hanging from behind the bathroom door, turned down the comforter in the expansive king-size bed, propped herself up with a clutch of down pillows, and turned on the impressive flat-screen TV with its remote. She had no idea what she would find on the TV, but she didn't care. The idea was to relax and fool her body into thinking it was time to sleep. What she found was a lot more English-speaking channels than she expected, so channel surfing was quite entertaining. When she stumbled upon the BBC, she almost stopped to actually watch the news. But finding it difficult to concentrate, she moved on and soon found CNN. Surprised to find an American cable network, she watched it for a while, since she didn't recognize the news anchors. After 15 minutes had gone by and she was about to move on, the female anchor caught her attention by beginning a piece on medical tourism, similar to the one that Jennifer had heard while waiting at the UCLA Medical Center's surgical lounge. Wondering if her grandmother's name would again be mentioned, she listened carefully, but her grandmother was not the part of the segment. It was another patient's name, but it was the same hospital, the Queen Victoria. Mesmerized, Jennifer sat up straighter as the news anchor continued. The Indian government's claims that their surgical results are as good or better than those anywhere in the West received another blow last night when Mr. Herbert Benfatti of Baltimore, Maryland, as we mentioned, passed away with a heart attack, slightly after 9 p.m., New Delhi time. This tragic result happened after the gentleman had an uncomplicated knee replacement some 12 hours earlier. Although Mr. Benfatti had a history of arrhythmia, he'd been in good health and even had a normal angiogram in the past month in preparation for his surgery. Our sources tell that such a death is not an infrequent phenomenon in private Indian hospitals. It's just that the Indian authorities have managed to keep a lid on such information leaking out. Our sources tell us further that they plan on continuing to report future as well as past deaths so prospective patients can have the information they need to make informed choices of whether or not they want to take such risk merely to save few dollars. CNN, of course, will bring such information forward the moment it is available. Now let's turn to... Jennifer's first reaction was sympathy for the Benfatti family and hope they hadn't had to hear the tragic news from the TV as she did. It also made her wonder about the hospital. 2 unexpected deaths from elective surgery 2 nights in a row was definitely excessive and as such most likely preventable and thereby more poignant. She also found herself wondering if Mr. Benfatti was married, and if he was, whether Mrs. Benfatti was in India, and if so, whether she was staying there at the same hotel. It was Jennifer's thought that if there was Mrs. Benfatti, it might be nice for Jennifer to convey her sympathies in person, and if she could marshal the nerve. The last thing Jennifer wanted to do was bother whoever was next of the kin, yet because of her ongoing experience with her grandmother's death, she thought she could commiserate better than anyone.